Welcome to Unadulterated Adultery Confessions channel that we hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching everything started at that dinner. I never thought it would happen like this, sitting across from Theodore Covington in that luxurious restaurant. I had no idea that this night would turn my life upside down. Next to me was my husband of 19 years, Jacob, but he might as well have been invisible. I hadn't felt anything for him in a long time. His business trips, his shifty glances, his dismissive answers. They had killed something inside me. He was unfaithful. I knew it, but I couldn't prove it. Theodore Covington, 69 years old, yet still looking strong, powerful, and full of energy, broad-shouldered, charismatic, with an undeniable presence. Every move he made, every word he spoke carried authority. That night his attention toward me was impossible to ignore. He never took his eyes off me, filled my glass before I could ask, leaned in slightly whenever he spoke, and Jacob, he couldn't have cared less. His only concern was impressing Theodore. 2. Jacob excused himself and went to the restroom. The moment he was out of sight, Theodore leaned in. His voice was low, calm, but full of meaning. Jacob's job is in trouble. Isabella, sales are dropping, he's losing focus. He paused for a second, locking eyes with me. Your husband isn't just stealing from me, Isabella, he's ruining his own future too. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached into his briefcase and placed a thick folder in front of me. I've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. If I go to the police, he's going to prison. As I slipped the folder into my bag, I felt his gaze burning into me. My hands hesitated over the cover of the folder. For a moment I wanted to see what was inside, but at the same time I was afraid to look. Theodore was watching me carefully, his eyes dark, unreadable, yet strangely mesmerizing. Then suddenly he smiled, leaning in just a little. His voice dropped to a quiet murmur. You look stunning tonight. Isabella, did you pick that dress just for me? His words froze me in place for a few seconds. I forgot how to breathe. Was he playing with me? Or did he really mean it? A strange feeling twisted inside me. His attention thrilled me, but at the same time it unsettled me. Before I could even process it, Jacob returned to the table. Theodore leaned back effortlessly, sipping his wine like nothing had happened. As Jacob sat down, Theodore turned to him, his voice cool and firm. You're flying to Miami tomorrow morning. You need to fix those sailings. Jacob stiffened. I saw him swallow hard before nodding, okay? When we got home, everything changed. When we got home, Jacob climbed into bed like nothing had happened and fell asleep immediately, watching how easily he relaxed, making something inside me twist. With growing unease, Theodore's words wouldn't leave my mind. The folder was still in my bag and the urge to open it was unbearable. The truth was the folder was just an excuse. Theodore already had what he wanted in mind before. This story between Theodore and Isabella gets even crazier. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. This story is about to get intense and I'd love for you to follow it all the way through. Leave a comment. It really helps. I walked into the kitchen in the middle of the night. I didn't turn the light on, reaching into my bag. I pulled out the folder. My hands were shaking. I took a deep breath and opened it. A few papers slipped out and then the photos, a hotel room in Miami. Jacob, a blonde woman, a bed and a bottle of champagne. My throat went dry, my stomach churned. That was it. Everything was clear now. Jacob had been lying to me, not just to me but to Theodore too, but Theodore he already knew. And that night was just the beginning. But the beginning of what the next morning, watching Jacob, I couldn't suppress the disgust building inside me. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie, carefully combing his hair, brushing invisible dust off his jacket. He was in a good mood. There was a spark of excitement in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. But it wasn't because of me, a husband with a good job and a powerful boss, and all he could think about was flying to Miami to cheat on me. As I watched him prepare with so much enthusiasm, only one thought ran through my mind. I had seen a real man. Theodore, his power, his presence, his gaze filled my thoughts. The fact that he hadn't fired Jacob yet was a miracle in itself. A man like Theodore could erase someone like Jacob with a snap of his fingers, and yet he hadn't because Theodore was a man who knew his power. Jacob slammed the door on his way out. I didn't even glance after him. I was alone, but that night loneliness didn't feel the same. Then the doorbell rang. Standing under the soft glow of the porch light was Theodore Covington Isabella. He said, his voice blending with the soft hum of the rain. I apologize for showing up unannounced for a few seconds. I froze, a strange warmth rising inside me. I was wearing a thin satin nightgown, the fabric clinging lightly to my skin, the straps teasing, sliding off my shoulders. My hair was messy and I was comfortable in my own home, but now standing in front of him, I felt incredibly exposed. Theodore, from head to toe, was flawless. The dark suit he wore fit perfectly over his broad shoulders. He stood in the doorway, his large frame taking up nearly all the space, his silver hair damp from the rain, gleaming under the dim light. His eyes burned with a slow, measured fire as he looked at me over. He didn't say a word, but the way his gaze traveled over me, it felt like it was touching my bare skin. That moment I thought about Jacob. Jacob stood in front of the mirror, admiring himself, buttoning his shirt with a smug expression, Jacob whistling happily as he headed off to Miami, and now the man in front of me was a real man, strong, commanding, dangerously alluring. Theodore didn't need to take a step forward. He already filled the entire space, and I realized then I wouldn't be able to resist this pull. This was just the beginning, and it wasn't going to end here. I opened the door wider. As he stepped inside, his scent filled the entire house, a deep, woody, intoxicating scent. Cold air from the rainy night slipped in behind him, but his presence alone made the whole room feel smaller. Warmer, he placed the wine bottle on the kitchen counter, then carefully set the folder on the table. Before I could say anything, his eyes locked onto mine. His voice was slow, deliberate. "Did you look?" I swallowed. "Yes," he gave a slight nod. "You weren't surprised, were you?" I looked away. "No." A brief silence settled between us. Then Theodore took slow, deliberate steps toward the living room and sat down in the chair. Leaning back, he spread his legs slightly, his gaze still locked onto me. I felt like a guest in my own home. "Truth is," Theodore said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Jacob was already dead to me." I held my breath, but he continued, pausing just slightly after seeing you. "I wanted to talk. You're different, Isabella, and I don't want to see you get hurt." Something inside me cracked at that moment. I had spent years dealing with men like Jacob, men who lied, who ignored, who betrayed. But no one had ever spoken to me like this. The way Theodore looked at me, the way his words wrapped around me, it confused me, but this was something else, a pull, a force, something I couldn't ignore. A warmth spread through me. Being near him made me feel both safe and in danger. At the same time, I had no idea how far this was going to go, or that my life was about to change completely. Theodore never took his eyes off me. As he stood up, he reached for the bottle of wine on the counter, opened it, and poured 3 glasses. When he handed me one, I realized my hand was trembling slightly, but Theodore's touch, it was strong. "I'm doing this for you," he said. "Jacob already sealed his own fate, but you deserve more." As I looked into his eyes, I felt something inside me shift, something that would never be the same again. Theodore's gaze never left mine. He wasn't just looking at me. He was looking through me, as if he could see every thought running through my mind. Then in a low, steady voice he spoke. "I see you're alone, Isabella." I held my breath. "We'll talk about Jacob later," he added, his voice almost a whisper, "but right now it's just you and me." As he spoke, his hand reached for the bottle of wine again. The soft sound of the cork twisting free was the only noise in the room. He poured 3 glasses, then handed one to me. My fingers shook slightly and Theodore noticed, but he didn't say a word. Instead, he gently took my hand, steadying it, his fingers barely brushing against my skin. He wasn't just watching me. He was studying me. His presence itself was consuming, and I was watching him too. His dark suit, slightly damp from the rain, clung perfectly to his broad shoulders with every breath. His C***** T rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm, the defined lines of his neck, the silver strands in his hair catching the dim light, even the way his loosened tie rested against his shirt. It all gave him a dangerously effortless allure, and no matter how much I tried to resist, I was being pulled toward him. "You know," he said, taking a sip of his wine, "I can't seem to stop looking at you. Isabella." I had been about to take a sip myself, but his words made me freeze. A heat crept up inside me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Theodore smirked slightly. "Do you really not know?" For a moment our eyes locked. A strange sense of calm settled inside me. It had been so long since I had spoken to a man like this, so long since a man had looked at me like this. I thought of Jacob, the coldness in his eyes, the indifference. His gaze had never lingered on me like this. But Theodore, he wasn't just watching me. He wasn't trying to make me feel something. He already felt it, and he was about to take what he wanted. I took a sip of the wine. It left a sweet, heavy, and warm sensation. I couldn't take my eyes off him. The uneasiness inside me had disappeared, replaced by a lightheadedness, a floating sensation. Theodore placed his hand on the table and leaned in slightly toward me. "Isabella," he said, his voice deeper, "now I can't let Jacob ruin your life. You're too beautiful for that." My breath caught, my lips parted slightly, but I couldn't speak. Theodore continued. "I have an offer for you." Everything inside me stopped. "I know it's fast," he said slowly, "but some things you just feel them right away. I'm not going to take Jacob's job from him, but I'll take his power. I'll demote him. He won't make the kind of money he used to, but he'll still survive for a few seconds." His eyes traveled over me before he spoke again. "And you, Isabella, I can take you away from here to Switzerland. We can go together." A ringing filled my ears. Was this why he was here to take me? A storm erupted inside me, his eyes, his words. Everything about Theodore had turned my mind upside down. But at the same time, one thought echoed inside me, a real man, strong, a man who knew what he wanted, a man who could truly touch me. Words got caught in my throat, but Theodore was patient. He wasn't leaving me an escape, but he wasn't forcing me either. He just watched me, waiting for my decision, and too just thought about Jacob, his betrayal, his indifference, the emotions I hadn't felt in years then about Theodore, his presence, the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel. And suddenly the chaos inside me disappeared. I lifted my eyes to his "Okay," I said. That moment, Theodore smiled slightly in his eyes. There was satisfaction mixed with victory. And then, without a moment of hesitation, he leaned in and kissed me. First he was careful, testing, but when I responded, everything unraveled. The moment his lips touched mine, I felt something inside me awaken, something I had forgotten for years. This wasn't an escape. This was understanding what it meant to be claimed by a real man. Kiss was deep, intense, and irreversible. When Theodore's hands settled on my waist, a shiver ran through me. He wanted me and I wanted him. My breath grew uneven as my hands found the thin straps of my satin nightgown. Without hesitation, I slid them off my shoulders, slow and steady, my fingers not trembling in the slightest. When the fabric slipped down my body and pulled at my feet, Theodore's eyes darkened. He took me in head to toe, his gaze burning through me in his eyes. I saw pure admiration. He didn't need to say anything, but I did. "You're the strongest, most attractive, and most perfect man I've ever seen," I whispered. Those words unleashed something inside him. Theodore moved in again, capturing my lips, and as he did, I felt something I hadn't in so long, something finally falling into place. Jacob didn't matter anymore, who he was, what he had done. It was all irrelevant tonight. It was just me and Theodore. Without breaking eye contact, I slowly turned around. My legs were trembling, but with every step I could feel Theodore moving closer. He didn't make a sound, but his breath was warm, steady. When I stepped into the bedroom, I let myself fall onto the bed. Pillows cushioned my body as Theodore's gaze never wavered. Then, without looking away, he slid off his jacket. He loosened his tie, pulling it free before tossing it aside as he slowly unbuttoned his shirt. I knew one thing for sure. He was in control, but I was ready to surrender, and as Theodore leaned over me, I knew this night was going to change everything. Theodore approached. I had started to feel him so close. His large frame and scent affected me deeply. With the effect of the wine, I pulled him toward me and sped things up. I could feel that Theodore liked it because his breathing had quickened when I felt something huge building inside me. Theodore took a deep breath and let out a whisper-like sound. Then he said, "So beautiful." We kept talking about how warm and passionate we both were. Theodore's movements would speed up from time to time. It was dizzying. I reached for his hair, then slowly moved my hands down his shoulders and placed them on his waist. My legs trembled, as if they had finally found where they belonged again. I pressed my hands against his waist. Theodore said, "Isabella, I'm going to take you away from here." I gasped, "Please, let's go." Theodore, practically begging, breathless. At some point the sounds I made grew louder, but I didn't care. I closed my eyes and let myself enjoy everything. I lost count of how many times I trembled. 3, maybe 5. That alone was proof that I had made the right decision. Theodore was out of breath, his face flushed red. I could see his strong shoulders tense, his legs cramping, and then he let himself go. As I felt Theodore's warmth inside me, he lay beside me. Theodore turned toward me in bed, his eyes searching mine. His breathing was still uneven, his skin warm, his strong, broad shoulders had relaxed, but there was still that sharp, unwavering look in his eyes. "What are you planning to do, Isabella?" he asked. His voice was low, but there was curiosity in it. "We can leave whenever you want. What's your decision?" I answered without hesitation, "I've made my decision." "Theodore," I squeezed his hand tightly, not bothering to hide the excitement inside me. "Tomorrow I'll leave a note and walk out of that house. I'll say I'm going to my mother's and file for divorce." Theodore tilted his head slightly, something gleaming in his eyes. "Isabella, a woman like you should live the life she deserves." I exhaled. Slowly I reached up and touched his face, my fingers brushing gently against his skin. "I won't actually be at my mother's, Theodore. I trust you. I want a new life with you." "In Switzerland," Theodore raised an eyebrow, but his eyes were filled with something else, something soft, something real. I continued, "And I want a child." "Theodore." My voice trembled, but there wasn't a single doubt. In my words, we should have a child together. The look on Theodore's face in that moment made me feel stronger than ever. There was surprise in his expression, admiration, and something deeply possessive. He stayed silent for a few seconds, then leaned in and kissed me. "I'd do anything for you, Isabella," he whispered. "Anything if you've made it this far." If this story resonated with you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us craft more engaging stories for you.